Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. And thank you for joining us for How to Create Connections That Lead to Opportunities. My name is Colin Mahan, and I'm a program manager at the Nasdaq Entrepreneurial Center. For those of you who may not know, who are just joining us for the first time, the Nasdaq Center is a nonprofit dedicated to enabling entrepreneurs from all over the world to realize their maximum potentials and grow. As you may have just seen in the chat, the Nasdaq Center, along with our partner Mentor Cloud, launched a free mentor matching platform for entrepreneurs called Mentor Makers. You can create your own advisory board to guide and inspire you with in-the-moment mentorship from topic experts and professionals dedicated to providing exceptional mentorship to entrepreneurs across all races, industries, and geographies. So, find or become a mentor today by using the link in the chat. As we know, mentorship matters to all entrepreneurs. Their success is dependent on it. Quick housekeeping item before we get started. We're going to open up for live Q&A at the end of the event. So please submit your questions in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen throughout the presentation. Now, none of what we do here at the center could be possible without all the amazing support from our sponsors, including Nasdaq, Lehigh University, Bank of the West, KPMG, Wilson Sonsini, Woodruff Sawyer, BPM, and NZTE. We're humbled by their contributions. During these still somewhat unique times, we're curious on how sentiment is among the entrepreneurs that we work with. So we're going to start by taking a poll to let us know how you're feeling and also what's keeping you up at night. The second question helps us at the center develop responsive programming to help you in the moment with your needs. So please vote and let us know how you're doing, and also what are some of the topic areas that you'd like us to cover in the future. So appreciate you voting, and I don't want to waste too much time because we might jump into the content, but appreciate you guys voting real quick. All right, it looks like we've got a decent amount of votes. So I'm going to end this poll, share those results. Looks like optimism's on the rise, which is good, but totally understand that there is some fear and anxiousness and just surviving out there. Finance and sales, two things that I hope we will cover today, so maybe you'll get some better sleep. Now, without any further delay, please join me in giving a warm welcome to your host, Roburta Burroughs. She's a customer success manager of named accounts at WalkMe, and she's a board member at the Nasdaq Entrepreneurial Center. Also joining her on our panel is Mike T. Brown, founder and CEO of WinWin, and he's also on the Center Advisory Board. And we've got Kwame Anku, CEO and chairman of the Black Star Fund. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. Over to you, Roberta.
Thank you, Colin. Thank you so much. I am really honored to have this opportunity to have this conversation with Mike and Kwame today. We're going to be discussing how to create connections that lead to opportunities. That's hugely impactful for anything you're doing in your life, whether you're a founder, whether you're going to the next step in your career. But if you are building a business and want to get capital, we have the best two people here, I think I can say, for a Friday before Memorial Day to have this discussion. So first, what I want to do, I would love for Mike and Kwame to introduce themselves a little bit. As Colin said, I'm Roburta Burroughs, Customer Success Manager at WalkMe, also too on the board of the Nasdaq Entrepreneurial Center. Kwame, I want to hand it over to you, my friend.
Yourself. Oh, thank you so much, Roberta. Excited to be with you all today and with my buddy and mentee and business partner and little brother, Mike T. Brown. And we're both honored to be here with Nasdaq Entrepreneurial Center. So yeah, I'm Kwame Anku, founder and CEO of Black Star Fund. Excited to be at this stage, the only VC in the country that's created two funds with all Black portfolios. And they are doing very, very well. My background goes from a crazy upbringing in Cleveland, Ohio, with two immigrant parents, all the way to finding myself in California, going to Stanford in the early 90s, and a crazy entrepreneurial journey of a production company, of selling legal insurance, of working with the top Fortune 100 companies in marketing consulting, to literally working very closely with the legendary rock star Prince. And then getting in the world of venture capital back in 2015 with initially the Black Angel Tech Fund, and then venturing off to create my own first solo fund, which is Black Star Fund today. So excited to share excited to be able to serve this amazing community. And I'll turn it over back to you or to Mike.
Mike.
Awesome. Thank you.
Board member.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. First of all, thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm excited about this conversation, particularly because I am here with my fellow board member at the Nasdaq Entrepreneurial Center and my dear brother and business partner, mentor, all that good stuff with Kwame Anku. So a little bit about myself. I'm the founder and CEO of Win-Win. I'm from Houston originally. We're now based here, but I've kind of made my trips around the country. I went out to Duke University where I was an athlete, but I always told people I just so happen to know how to tackle people. But while there, I was a two-time All-American, led the country in tackles, but I was more proud of graduating early and setting myself up for a bright future. Headed to law school, but had an opportunity to go tackle more people, this time for a little bit of money. So I played linebacker in the NFL and then ultimately made this unique transition I like to call tackling the tech, and dove into Silicon Valley head first back in 2014 without ever having heard about Silicon Valley or a tech startup. So you talk about somebody, not being aware or exposed to this industry and getting kind of a late start, but dove in nonetheless. Taught myself how to code, design, moved out to the Bay with the goal to start a company. And I'm happy to say I did just that with starting Win-Win back in 2016. And it's been an amazing journey, full of the ups and downs that are typical with creating something in the world that has never existed. Not really an easy thing to do. So I'm excited to be here. And I think the conversation that we're going to dive into is necessary, one that I went in and have continued to learn every day from folks like Kwame and being a part of the Nasdaq Entrepreneurial Center board for the last few years and passionate about lifting as I climb and passing along that knowledge. So I'm excited to jump in.
Thank you, Mike. I'm going to actually just start with questions. I definitely want our audience to understand the impact that you all have made. And it's just great that you're here to share that with us all. So Kwame, I'm going to start with you.
Okay.
Data out there, there's a lot of capital. Founders, right? We know that. However, many struggle to get access to that capital, particularly Black and Brown founders. And with that, I want to know from you, why do you think that's the case, or at least that's the notion, and how particularly have you directly impacted that?
Sure. So that's the question of the year, right? That's the question of the decade in the space. And what I've found, Roberta, is that, oftentimes the way we frame things is what sets the path within which we engage it. And so we have a tendency of having issues and conversations around the lack of access to capital. And when you think about that, what it means is that there's this huge swath of money that for some reason is just hard to get access to. It's just sitting there, and then somehow we're kind of, bewildered as to how we can get access to it. What I know as an entrepreneur for decades, and now being on the front lines of this space with respect to the equity investment space with folks of color, and specifically with African-American entrepreneurs, is that there's really three things that we have to focus on: capital, mentorship, and access to power networks. We talk about access to capital in a vacuum. In business, everything is in a context. So when we're just really honest, it doesn't matter skin color, doesn't matter gender, doesn't matter systemic isms. What we all know is true for everybody is that your ascent to success is predicated on being able to fuel your business, having mentors and guidance, and having access to power networks. And so what I've done with the fund is create an organization that focuses on those three things, not just writing the checks, but helping to cultivate not only the entrepreneur and the leader, but the systems and the pillars within that business, i.e. operations, i.e. growth strategy, i.e. board development, i.e. growth optimization and product development, roadmaps, and then leveraging the network that I've built in almost 50 years on the planet to help to hyper accelerate the growth.
That was amazing. And And it really allows me to go to my next question to you, Mike, because you all are brothers. You guys are, and brothers in the sense that you all have definitely worked together for a long period of time in the trenches.
Yeah.
This is probably to say the least. So that what you were talking about in terms of building those power networks, particularly Kwame, Mike, when you've built win-win, you've raised money. More importantly, how have those connections, and Kwame's one of them, been so important for you to raise money? I definitely want to make that connection just from what Kwame says to the question to you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. And what I've learned, right, is connections are paramount. Honestly, across the board, right? I think in life in general. And when I dove into tech in Silicon Valley, right, didn't know many people at all. But to Kwame's point, started to realize that I actually have a couple power networks that I can leverage, right? And this was again even outside of raising capital. Being able to have connections to pro athletes and celebrities and folks like that, which for our business model was very important, right? And that allowed me to accelerate growth in terms of building the partner network on that side, just based on the connections that I had in those relationships. But when it came to investors specifically, to be honest, this was something where I was learning how important those connections were. And as I tapped into some of my power networks, right, namely Duke University, one of the programs that I went through very early on when I first got introduced to Silicon Valley was through Draper University. Tim Draper and his venture capital fund had a program. And so being able to leverage that as well as, things like NFL, right? Having those associations were very important. And what it ended up doing, particularly as I started to understand, wow, like this Duke network, and I think any college, right? Any school, any affinity group, right? I'm also an Omega. And so like our first check, to be honest, was a connection through my fraternity, right? Which again, at the time I didn't even realize was one of these power networks that can put me in front of a number of different types of folks, right? And as I'm going in looking to raise capital, just realizing how important that was big for me. And we had the great fortune of being able to raise quite a bit of money right out the gate. And as I look back on that and realize, wow, we were able to raise about $1 million right within the first 6 months of the company. That was directly, because of the connections that I was able to not only have, but foster, right? And I think that's something that I believe is very important from the founder or really anybody's standpoint, but particularly with the founder when it comes to raising money. There's at those earliest stages, it's not very transactional, if that makes sense, right? There's a real authentic building of a relationship that ultimately I think leads to that capital. And for me, I was able to do that in a pretty powerful way. So connections are extremely important. And again, to go back to Kwame's point, maybe not everybody went to Duke or played in the NFL. I totally get that, right? But what I didn't realize was there's these networks that I'm a part of that I can definitely leverage. And I think everybody has some version of that if they think long enough and look, they could potentially find that as well.
100% agree with that. And I think that even what you said at the end in terms of not everybody, going to Duke or being in the NFL or maybe having those immediate networks that they can see as, oh, I can tap into them. They're powerful, even being in a fraternity. I got to give you a shout out because my dad, rest in peace, was an Omega.
There we go.
But what I do want to ask, and Kwame, I'm going to go back to you because I've actually heard you have this message from particularly talks that you've given at the Aspen Institute. Can you talk about the mindset shifts that entrepreneurs need to really make?
Sure.
To be successful at raising money? And I think that this will, align with what Mark was talking about in terms of maybe you didn't go to Duke or maybe you didn't do what mindset do you really need to have or what shift you need to make?
Sure. So, part of what you're referring to, like a pillar quote of mine that I hold very closely to my heart that I learned from Wayne Dyer. And he says, when you change the way you see things, the things that you see change. And I'm a firm believer that we, again, going back to what we said earlier, that we have a tendency of framing things, in my humble opinion, in the wrong way. Now we can quantifiably show it's the wrong way because we're actually not getting the right results. So when we change the way we see things, the things that we see change. When we go into this game and we think about our relationships, we've got to really like scientifically break and parse these things apart. There's a difference between a network and networking and connections and connecting, right? There's a difference between that. And the most important word and dynamic is relationships. And so when we talk, and I notice in those three things, I didn't say anything about access and capital, right? So we've got to focus there, and then we have to break these things apart. A business partner of mine told me decades ago, and we saw that theme in the promotional around this particular event. He said, Kwame, when there is a connection, there is an opportunity. We don't connect for the sake of connecting. We connect in order to create opportunities. But once you've made the connection, where do we go from there? A bunch of connections creates a network. But what activates it, what extracts power out of it is relationships. You have to be an investor in order to have investments made into you. So if you're an entrepreneur, the way we framed it, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm creating a business. I need money, and I need to find investors to give me money to build my business. That framing right there is catastrophically self-defeating because it's not what the actual dynamic is, and you're not actually playing the game that we're playing. You have to be an investor. You come to a network and invest in that network first. It's like the Bible says that we sow our time, our talent, or our treasure. So if you come to the table as an entrepreneur and say, well, I don't have any money, I can't be an investor. You've got time, you've got talent. So when you come to a network, you want to invest in that network, not thinking about how quickly you can get a return, but by doing what? Adding value. The entrepreneurial capital game is not a game of I need money. It is a game of value proposition. What value are you bringing to the network? What value are you bringing to the investment ecosystem? That is actually what we're supposed to be focusing on. Now, if you never learn this and no one ever tells you this, and this is something that Mike and I talked a lot about, hopefully he can expound on as a former NFL player, is that this is literally like showing up to a hockey game in a football uniform, in a basketball uniform. You are never going to win that game. So you're coming to the game prepared to play the wrong game and not knowing how to play the game that you're actually supposed to be playing. That is why there's a massive disconnect. Now, does that mean that the systemic isms are not relevant? They're very relevant and they're very much alive and well. But if you understand what I'm saying and you make the necessary adjustments, those things, one, will not inhibit you or prevent you from getting to your goal. And in some cases, I would argue most cases, will actually help you as an entrepreneur. Because if you've been able to figure out how to overcome and navigate through the systemic sexism and racism and the lack of Ivy League degrees and attain success, then you've got the wherewithal as an entrepreneur to weather through all the trials and tribulations that are going to come in the growing of your business that have nothing to do with systemic isms. You see what I mean? So that's a big thing for me that we train, that we work on with our entrepreneurs, is understanding that you are playing a game of value proposition. And folks of color, and I'll say this lastly, Roberta, is that we've kind of been raised to think that we're playing a game of meritocracy. Yep. If I do well in school, I get promoted. If I'm in my job and I get a good review, I get promoted. If I show people how good I am, then I get the keys and I get the trinkets and I get the rewards. In the investment world, everything is about value proposition. And truth is, they don't care what school you went to.
And that,
what value are you bringing to them? And that's what they're going to invest in. Because remember, classic sales 101 training, price is only an issue in the absence of value. So you got to just focus on the value proposition. And that's what attracts the attention, the help, the support, and of course, the capital.
100%. I mean, value is so key, and people talk about value so much. And I think that what you just said Mike, I'm going to veer a little bit off of, some of the questions that we have, just because this conversation is so alive right now. And I wanted to ask you, what are some of the things that when you first met Kwame, or when you were first making some of these connections to raise capitals, that you had to do to really kind of pivot or show value in a way that maybe you didn't think you had to when you first were starting out? And Kwame, you can elaborate too on maybe some of the things that you worked with Mike on to, allow for that to happen. I think people would love to hear like a real-time example of what that looks like.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So just to clarify, you're asking the ways that I was able to show value or show value add in that building of the relationship. Is that what you're referring to?
Relationship and creating the opportunities that you had from the connections. Yes.
Yeah, so absolutely. There's a couple different examples here, but one that kind of stood out, right? As again, mind you, when I jumped in, I didn't know very much. I hadn't done a ton of research, and I think that actually helped me, right? Because I didn't have on blinders in that, or I didn't realize like what the industry norm was, right? Or like what that time was for me. And I think this has always been one of my, advantages, if you will, right? Just having this natural ability and kind of mindset of always putting in value, right? When I'm in a relationship, I mean, the company name is win-win, right? But that's really like a deep mindset of mine, right? When I'm building the relationship, right? To Kwame's point, I'm always looking for ways that I can be helpful, right? And so, for example, even in some of those earlier connections and conversations, it wasn't, and I had one person in particular that was like one of the bigger connections that I was able to make, and that helped me in that initial funding was Malcolm Jenkins. This was back in 2016, and this was when I was first starting the company. And Malcolm, if you don't know, is an NFL veteran, one of the top players in the league, two-time Super Bowl champion. And we made the connection through the fraternity, right? Being Omegas. And one of the things that when we got connected, for me, it wasn't like, all right, I need to get this money. How do I get the money? I'm just talking about the money. And it was more about us connecting and having a relationship. And then for Malcolm, in this particular example, it was his first time kind of venturing into investing and tech and figuring this out. And so what ultimately happened was we were having conversations, not me pitching him on win-win, but me actually educating him on the things that I had been learning, right? Now that I had been in Silicon Valley a couple of years, and we're just having conversations about, how the investment thing works, how, starting a company works, and just understanding those things. And so it was less me pitching him, right? But me actually adding value to him in that he was learning from me at the same time, right? And I was very upfront, like, look, I'm learning this, but like as a newfound friend, and like we're connected in these ways, I want to see you win. I want to make sure that you feel like you're getting something. And so I know without a shadow of a doubt that was one of the things that ultimately led Malcolm, because it wasn't like we met, pitched him, and then boom, the money was there, right? It was a little bit of a process in terms of just building that relationship. So from a value add standpoint, I think Malcolm, and again, particularly when you're dealing with celebrities or high influence type of folks, right? Everybody's always trying to extract from them, right? And for me, having been on that stage and having had those types of situations, I'm always going in kind of on the opposite, right? And that how can I be adding value to you, right? I'm not trying to get anything out of you. And I think that's ultimately what, not to speak for him directly, but what we talked about is those were the things that he appreciated, was that kind of back and forth value exchange. And then ultimately, the value aligned with him and the opportunity. And, again, that's just one of those examples where I felt that I was providing value, as did he, and it ultimately led to a real opportunity to Kwame's point in terms of him investing. And that has been something that has, led to immense value for the company with his involvement, reinvesting again. So again, that's just an example to answer your direct question about being able to add value in a way that I wasn't even, planning to, but it worked out that way. And it ultimately worked out and has continued to work out.
That's great. Just with regard to that too, I think I wanted to shift it a bit when we talk about what you did to add value with Malcolm and creating kind of that symbiotic relationship that you had, you know, that ultimately built, you know, a connection which related to an opportunity, expanded your power network base, so to speak. But if I could shift for a moment to that, you said you didn't really know what you were doing in the beginning, but you knew that you had something. Kwame, you talked about you come to the table, you have time, talent, money. Maybe you don't have the money or the treasure, but you have the time and you have the talent. So Kwame, for people who may, you know, who are entrepreneurs and they want to get to know people now in this pandemic time, in person, what do you think is the best way to do that from an online perspective? And then too, let's say if somebody even wants to get in touch with you, what's the right way to do that? I mean, I think Mike talked a little bit about it in terms of that sharing of, you know, value and abilities between each other, but I would love to hear from you. What do you think you would suggest to entrepreneurs who are listening?
Sure. Well, if you don't mind, Roberta, I'd like to inject a perspective and a level of sobriety too, because Mike and I can be very inspirational and we can share all this great stuff and this is how we did it and this is what you need to do and here's the how-tos. But there's also a level of just like sobriety that we have to bring to this conversation, right? And there's a Chinese phrase that says the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time to plant the tree is today. And sometimes, like, I think Mark Cuban says this, and it's a little harsh, but it's true. There's a difference between being an entrepreneur and a wantrepreneur. So just because I say I've got an idea and I need money, it doesn't make me an entrepreneur, right? And I'll be honest with you, the mindset that says I have a business and I need money tells me you're actually not an entrepreneur. Because what you're saying is that in order for me to make this thing work, I need someone to give me money to basically fuel my dream. And that's actually not how this game works. And so there's a way that you can hack it. I can teach you the hack, which is if you don't have the relationships, you have to leverage the people who do. But even that will have some short-term gains, but it won't really give you the power that you're looking for. So it's okay because at the end of the day, look, it's not about I didn't go to Stanford. It's about, did you spend the last 5 years of your life investing in relationships? Okay. And I'll give you a real example of this. I learned what I'm sharing today, and it sounds like, man, I got this thing down and we do it. We've got these amazing networks and relationships, which we do. But I had a time in my life not that long ago, it may have been 12 years ago, where I was doing an audit of my life and I was comparing myself to my younger brother. Now, we both went to Ivy League schools and had great educations, but I was looking at his life and the quality of his relationships and his ability to make things happen. And I just felt like he was able to do it in a much more effective way. And I started to look at the life choices I'd made versus his. And it hit me like a ton of bricks. I was a type of personality before that I would stay and grind in the lab as an entrepreneur. And friends would come to town and call me and say, Kwame, I'm in town for a couple of days. I'd love to grab a drink with you. And I'm, oh man, I'm really busy. I'm working on this thing. I get friends, hey, my daughter's 2-year birthday is happening. We'd love to see you. Oh God, I'm really busy. That was usually my MO. My brother, on the other hand, a friend of his little girl was having a piano recital. He would be there. Somebody was having a bar mitzvah. He would be there. Somebody was coming in town and only had an hour to meet up for a drink before they caught a plane. He would go. And he did that consistently over years, never looking to get anything out of it, just there developing, maintaining, and pouring into those relationships. And I said, that's the difference. And I made a shift in my own life to be the guy that shows up, learning that 80% of success is just showing up. And so then what happens is over time, you've invested in these relationships. People know you, they like you, they trust you. They want to see you win. They want to be there for you because you've been there for them. And so what you can do in the short term is the hack. I don't have those relationships. I don't have 5 years and 10 years of having done that. You can get connected to people like us and you can leverage ours. But in order to leverage ours, you have to be bringing something of value. You see what I mean? It always comes back down to the value proposition. So I say that, Roberta, because it's important to have a level of sobriety to this. One of the reasons why certain entrepreneurs are just uber successful, and we all know this when we're honest, is that it's usually the third and fourth time entrepreneurs. You see what I mean? And so you look at our portfolio and you see like a Dawn Dixon, who's like record amount of crowdfunding equity and everything else. This is her fourth venture. You look at a company like Actively Black, this amazing clothing company. Well, before Actively Black, there was Active Faith, a multi-million-dollar clothing company with 74 your customers in 74 countries. And Steph Curry is one of his investors. So when he starts a new company with that track record, it's not a surprise he's doing $1 million in sales in less than 8 months, right? So the how-tos in there, you can't just follow the how-tos, because what he's leveraging is experience and relationships. However, when those entrepreneurs are connected to certain people who have a vested interest in their success, they're able to leverage their networks. The last thing I'll say is this, and I think this is important, it ties like Mike and I together, and I think we'll go back to your point around a real story or like a real example. Mike's pivot from tackling the tech happened when he attended an event in Silicon Valley that the NFL Players Association put on during the Super Bowl when it was in Santa Clara, okay, years ago. One of the gentlemen who plays right now in the NFL, Kelvin Beachum, who's one of the unsung heroes in our entrepreneurial ecosystem, was at that event. I was at that event. I met Kelvin Beachum at that event. I did not meet Mike Brown.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
It was later, years later, when Kelvin Beachum connected Mike Brown and I together. You see what I mean? So when we say 80% of success is just showing up, like I just showed up and I met this great guy named Kelvin Beachum, and Mike Brown and he are friends. And when Mike needed help taking his business to the next level, he reached out to Kelvin, and Kelvin had a network that included me, and Kelvin made the connection. You see what I mean? Because he could see the value in what Mike was doing, and he felt that I could be helpful, right? That's why I got in the car and drove 2.5 hours to meet this young man for lunch and hear what was going on and see how I could be helpful, because of the respect that I have for Kelvin. You see what I mean? So like, Mike's amazing. I do some cool stuff, but the reality is how our worlds collided was through this incredible gentleman named Kelvin Beachum. But just think that the incredible success story of Black Star Fund and Win-Win as partners, we were in the same room. And didn't meet. And that's when Mike was like, I'm going to do this.
Yep.
I'm going to learn how to code. I'm going to go to Draper University. I'm going to be a tech entrepreneur. We were literally in the same room and never met. And as fate would have it, destiny would have it, our lives, our worlds were meant to collide. And we were meant to come together and build something beautiful. But the connector was this amazing gentleman named Kelvin Beachum. So this is why the relationships are so important. And I guarantee you, because I know we have some entrepreneurs that are saying, but. We live this every day. We see it working every day. And we are here to help you and serve you. When you change the way you see things, the things that you see change.
I have so much to say, and I'm the moderator, so I'm not supposed to say too much.
We'd love to hear what you have to say.
But I think that what you just mentioned about just showing up is so important. And the fact that you pivoted and say we need to bring some sobriety to the conversation, I think it's important. The reality is there could be people saying, I know, but I'm this, I don't feel comfortable, I'm busy, I'm that. We all are busy. We all have 500,000 things that we're doing in the background on top of the responsibilities that we need to do. And we decide what those priorities are. Mm-hmm. And you all may not have had the relationship that you had now if you just didn't show up and you didn't even talk at the event. All you had to do was show up. And I think if anyone can take anything away from that, it's the importance of, if there is something that is an important event or something that you think can help your business as an entrepreneur, Even if you show up, this is a story and an example of you don't know what that will lead to 2 to 3 years from now. You don't know what kind of impact that will have just for you showing up. Even if you don't meet the people that you think you're supposed to meet, you never know. And I think that's what I got out of that story. It was awesome. And I will say that I'm a moderator. I'm on the board of the Entrepreneurial Center here. And I have such a passion for entrepreneurs. I'm not one. And I want to be very clear in saying that you can support and have that passion for entrepreneurs and understand that what they're bringing to the world is something that is, you're building something, you're creating something that you're sharing with the world. And to be able to support that, even if you're not one, this is the reason why we're here today. This is the reason we want to continue that flow and that innovation and that creativity to continue to spark and, just create all these new and different things that we can bring to the world and share with people overall. So I love that story.
Yeah.
I'll go to the next question.
Roburta, I'd love to, if you wouldn't mind, I'd love to, because Kwame kind of scratched the surface of that story, and it's one that I think for this conversation, like I got to give a little bit more because there's so much that is packed into that story in terms of
add on to it.
So yeah, thank you. So there's the showing up piece, right? So to Kwame's point, like when I was first getting into tech, right? Again, for me, I didn't even realize I had the power network, so I wasn't even operating as if I had them. And I'm telling you, when I got out to the Bay Area, I was just showing up. And I remember my wife and I, like, she's not into tech, she's not in the tech industry, she's in education. So I would always be like, all right, oh, there's a meetup, there's this, there's that. And I would just, one of my dear friends, Eric Thomas, the motivational speaker, had a big series called, Get to the Spot, right? I'm like, I just got to show up, right? And I'm a man of strong faith. And I just believe that, nothing happens and doesn't happen, right? Everything happens and doesn't happen for a reason, right? So I'm just showing up, making authentic connections, right? And to be honest, I'm not even a big fan of like going to the networking events, but I knew that I just need to get to the spot. Yeah. Right. And I'll meet the people that I need to meet. Right. And not that I'm going to go to a networking event and walk out of there with a check. Right. But just creating authentic relationships. And so that whole situation with Kelvin, and it's also touches on value add. Right. So when I met Kelvin, right, we were both like learning this whole thing together. Right. Like we're literally on the bus with the NFLPA driving across the Dumbarton Bridge in the Bay Area to like go to Andreessen Horowitz. Right. And hear a presentation from them. There's like a bunch of NFL players and myself being a former player. And I remember on the bus ride back, I had already been kind of learning some stuff at that point. And me and Kelvin were just having a deep conversation about, man, what did it mean when he said this, right? And I'm trying to translate as I'm just having this newfound knowledge myself. But what ended up happening was that was my first time meeting Kelvin, and it established the connection, right, which led to us having a deeper relationship. So you fast forward, a year or so later, and, I'm talking to Kelvin about like where I am with the business, what I'm trying to do. And, to be honest, Kelvin was putting some capital to work himself, right? But I wasn't solely focused there. If he wanted to invest, great. I thought it would be a great thing to have him on board. But just because we had an authentic relationship, he was thinking about who can I connect Mike to, right? Because the support is still there nonetheless. And I think that was one thing that I learned is a lot of founders that I talked to going in like kind of, there's this hardball game. I'm here for the check, right? And that's it. And you realize that there's a lot more value that you can have, right? And extract by just focusing on having an authentic relationship, right? Because people do business, and Kwame has taught me this. People do business with people that they like, right? That they enjoy, that they have a relationship with, that they respect. And so what I'm getting at is he ended up making this connection to Kwame, and Kwame may remember this. I brought it up a couple of times before, but we finally got a time on the books, and I'm all excited because I've done all the research. I watched the different TED Talks and the things that he's done at that point, and I went through my whole spiel, via phone call and Zoom, and he told me, he paused. He said, "You know what? I have a decision to make here." He said, I can either respond with the pure investor hat on and just give you some feedback there, or I can respond, as a friend, as a brother, somebody, know that we just met. But, again, going back to the connection, who made the connection, his respect for Kelvin, right? That's, protection by association is one of the things that my fraternity believes in, right? If you're an Omega, right, and I'm an Omega, there's some level of like, okay, I understand where you're coming from, and there's a level of respect there out the gate. And so Kwame said, I can make the decision to talk to you as a friend that wants to help you, right? And he told me, I'll never forget this. I was in a phone booth at the Battery, like cooped up, like listening to this man, and he said, I'm gonna make a conscious decision to talk to you as a friend and somebody that wants to help you and see you succeed. And I'll tell you, Roberta, that was a pivotal moment in Win-Win's history. And it was Kwame taking the next 2 hours to walk me through the understanding of like the language that I was speaking, trying to pitch, right? I was in the football uniform at a hockey game talking to him, right? And he quickly shared with me all, like, I was just taking so many notes, and it was I remember getting off the call and just sitting back and exhaling like, wow, and realizing that this was pivotal, right? There was some, I didn't even know what it would become. But then the other part of the story that I think, to Kwame's point, I didn't know that about him and his brother and the shift that he made, because then he said, you know what, let's get together. And that's when he drove from Sacramento to the Bay Area, right? And I remember we meet and all of that, and they were talking, and I find out later, I think maybe during that meeting, that he drove there just to meet with me. I assumed that he was already going to be in the Bay. And again, that's him showing up and him recognizing something in me to like want to have that conversation. And another really important thing that happened after that, not too long, right? Again, about building relationship, because, Kwame was just helping me at that point, right? And it wasn't even like I was going in pitching for capital, but what I was getting so much more out of it, right, outside of capital. But one of the things that I'll never forget is my daughter was actually turning, I believe it was 4 or 5 years old at the time. And I just mentioned it to Kwame, right? And next thing I know, like, him and his brother are like they come to the Bay Area, right? And come to my house. And, they haven't met my family. I've only met Kwame one time in person, but they showed up authentically and genuinely wanting to just wish my daughter a happy birthday, and brought a gift, and was able to meet my wife. Again, this is before a check. This is before, the deep relationship that we would ultimately have. But I can tell you, for me and my family, my wife, that was a big moment, right? That was one of those showing up moments, fostering that relationship. And, without going into all the details at this point, but it set us further into the path of becoming, brothers in this business and in this industry, and aligned on the vision, and him becoming a board member, an investor, an advisor, and a mentor, right? And us now partnering together on separate business ventures. And I mean, again, it just goes back to that connection, right? And again, this is obviously a very specific example of connections that lead to opportunities, right? But what I believe wholeheartedly is that every entrepreneur, every aspiring entrepreneur, founder has that ability, right? But to Kwame's point, you got to shift your mindset to understand, how you need to make those connections. And I'll end by just saying that you ultimately just want to be authentic, man. Just be yourself, right? People can typically read through the BS, right? You don't have to put on the mask, right? Like, just go in. Don't try to be somebody you're not. And people, as I always say, real recognize real. And when that happens, the opportunities are endless. So I just had to share that, because that's one of the pivotal things that has happened to me personally, as well as the company. And I want to let the entrepreneurs that are watching know that, this is that's something that can happen for anybody, right? It's just about showing up, being authentic, and understanding what the ultimate goal is.
I'm glad that you did. And I'm actually glad that this conversation became more organic and authentic. And you really talked about these particular situations that happened. Yeah, of course, I have scripted questions, but this is a conversation about how to create connections that lead to opportunities. And this is a real conversation that we're having. I'll say this, we're at the point now where we're going to start taking questions from the audience. And ultimately, the dialogue that we've had today has incorporated a lot of the things that I was going to ask anyway. So I appreciate this conversation. I think the key is just the showing up and understanding that you do have time and talent. You know, everybody has time. That is the thing. Time is a great equalizer. It really is, because we all have it. So if we are going to contribute to building those relationships and those connections to foster perhaps opportunities for us in the long term, whether you're a founder or not, I mean, that's something I think will be key for us to take away. So let me go here and take a few questions from the audience. Let's see here. I have one. So we talked about this a lot, but this is one, I guess people want a little bit more specifics here. What does showing up mean in a digital world with multiple ways to connect, but also you can avoid being shielded from the connection? Like, how can you, what does that really mean in the digital space?
Yeah. So let me take a stab, and I'll give kind of two things that can be helpful. Okay. I did say earlier that we give you some hacks, right? Whether it's in the real world, right, or whether it's in the digital world, the quickest way to add value is to be a connector. Okay. So what you find is that very successful people ask more questions than make comments. That's always a telltale sign. As an investor, I want to be around people who are intellectually curious. And so when you're pitching, you're kind of doing the show, like this and that. I'm going to show you this, and we're going to do this, and we're going to change the world, we'll make all this money about it. When you're around, I'm drawn to people who ask questions, because I'm drawn to people who are intellectually curious. And as an entrepreneur, that means you're learning and you want to understand how things work. If you come to an event, the best question you can ask somebody is, what do they do and what do they need? And if you keep doing that, you start to assess who people are and what they need, and start connecting people. So you could show up to an event, an online event. I'll give you a perfect example. I was on an online event, and it wasn't a webinar, right, like this, but it was like you 80 people and you could see them, and there was a chat and people said different things. And I reached out to this particular gentleman and I said, I love what you're doing. He runs the venture fund. And they were saying they want to get more involved in the equity diversity space, whatever. And I said, look, I'm here to help. I wasn't asking for any money. I was just here to help. So we set up a webinar. We talked, and I understood, and I gave him some ideas. He was so blown away by the ideas. He was like, look, man, I want to work with you. And I want to connect you to some people. But I came to him as the big VC who could invest in my fund. It's not what I was asking for, because I'm in that network. I'm practicing what I'm preaching, right? So it doesn't matter if it's the real world and you're going to a gathering of 15 people, or whether you're online, you're reaching out to somebody who's doing something really interesting and you're seeing their posts on LinkedIn, they're looking for something, they're searching for something. You just reach out and say, I think I might be of service to you. Do you want to jump on a quick Zoom? I've got a pretty good network, and I'd love to see how I could get you connected with people who could be helpful to you. If you become that person, that's a great way of adding value. It's a great way of deepening your network. And that's the way that you can show up. So you can show up on the digital, you can show up in the real world. It's a question of what are you doing in those environments? And my strong suggestion, ask questions, figure out who people are and what they need, and then connect people who can meet those needs. And then watch what happens.
Mike, do you have anything to add to that?
Man, not much. I think that was perfectly, described in terms of how you do that. Like I said, whether it's real world or not, or digitally, right? Making that connection and the value add, right? And it reminded me of even some of the things that I've done, right? And I get real value out of making those connections, right? Even when I don't stand to gain anything out of it, right? And I think that's part of a mindset shift that can be applicable here, right? In terms of, I just want to see people connect and create value for one another. And to Kwame's point, when you're one of those people that do that, right, then I think naturally the opportunities for you to gain value out of those relationships comes very naturally. And so I think he hit on it perfectly in terms of the mindset, right? So there's the showing up, right? But then the mindset of what are you doing in those spaces, right? Like, I'm not showing up trying to just extract value. Who are you? What do you can you do? Like, and this was always my issue when I was getting out there, right? I would go to these networking events, right? And again, I was making great connections, but I was also noticing folks that would even come up to me, hey, what's your name? What do you do? And like, you could immediately tell that if it wasn't something that jumped right out at them, it was like, oh, you could be valuable to me. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool, great to meet. And like, just, and it was so abrupt. And I'm like, all right, good to meet you as well. Right. And again, that's where you don't want to show up and do that. That's what I would, strongly suggest, right? And go in asking questions. And the thing I also end with is just saying, don't feel discouraged, right? Because sometimes when you go and you just show up, right, and there's not some profound connection and all of that, that doesn't seem like that, right? You never know where it leads to. And a good friend of mine, Dhani Jones, former NFL player, now doing a lot of stuff in the venture space, told me that, first comes the relationship, then comes the money, right? Especially in these earlier stages of the company. Now, if you're doing 100 million in revenue, sometimes the relationship isn't as important, right, to get that check. But you get my drift there. So I think Kwame was spot on.
So we're actually coming towards the end of the session. And I have one last question that I want to put forth to you all. And I think it'll take us through the end of the day. Any comments on social purpose entrepreneurship versus entrepreneurship for the goal of, making it to the top 1% of investors, like social entrepreneurship versus, I guess, pure for-profit entrepreneurship? What are your thoughts on that?
Mike, I'm gonna let you start, and I'm gonna come behind you on that one.
Yeah, I'll keep it brief because I believe that can coexist, right? And I mean, win-win, I believe is a prime example of that, right? Where our part of our ethos as a company, right, with gamified giving and the technology that we've created and this innovative way for people to engage with their favorite celebrities and brands, all while supporting good through charitable donations and things like that. But we are, squarely a for-profit looking to be one of the 1%, right? And so my thought quickly is just that though you don't have to compromise on either, right? I think that when you build a real model that has some good impact in the world, right? I think that actually is an advantage, right? Because we live in a world now that we need we people having more awareness and wanting to be impactful and positive is really important. Particularly, I mean, even just from a business standpoint, you're talking about millennials and Gen Z as a customer base, for example, right? Statistically, they want to be with brands. They want to spend their money with brands that have a social good impact in the world. And so I think for founders and entrepreneurs out there, I would certainly say, don't shy away from the good, just to go for the profits, right? I think if you really think about your business and design it in a way, I think it actually becomes an advantage for you. And we've started to see that on our end as well. Now you want to make the revenue for sure, but being able to do both, I think is certainly accomplishable. But I'll throw it to Kwame for thoughts.
Yeah, so thanks, Mike, for that. And I think this is a really important question. Now, this is Kwame's perspective. This is not like everything else we've been talking about today. Sure, it was our perspective, but it was also that the how-tos and the whys and philosophies and concrete action steps that you can take in proven things that we know work. What I'm gonna share right now is just my opinion. I remember being a child, I'm talking about elementary school, and being perplexed by the duality of for-profit and nonprofit. Because I could see at 8 years old that nonprofit was set up to help people. And then it's the word nonprofit. We've got an entity that is not designed to make money. And that's the entity that helps people, which by default means that the thing that's set up to make money is not designed to help people. So why do you live in a duality world where the thing that actually makes money, which is the power source of the global machine, somehow when you get into that, it's not really about helping people. In a lot of ways, it hurts people. The nonprofits then have to go to the people who actually make money to get their charitable donations to help people, which is why you're where you're at. 20 years ago, they came up with the idea of social entrepreneurship, right? So you could kind of do your philanthropic help save the world stuff, and you could get investor money people to give you some money because it wasn't really nonprofit. And no. When I started pitching early for the fund, people assumed, because we were focusing on Black entrepreneurs, that it was social impact. And I started every presentation and I said, so let me be clear, this is not a social impact fund. What we understand is that when it is successful, it will have a tremendous social impact. This is a venture capital fund that is set up and designed to unapologetically make money. And why is that important? Because I'm just like a capitalist who just wants to have lots of money and buy yachts? No, because if you're saying that less than 1% of venture capital gets to African-American entrepreneurs, and you invest in only African-American entrepreneurs, and they have outsized returns and spectacular revenue generation, then everybody's going to want to invest in this group. That's why you have to do it. So if you don't have billionaire Black entrepreneurs who have built $100 million, billion-dollar market cap companies on the planet Earth, sitting at the table with the tech titans, like, what are we doing? See, so for me, I don't separate the two at all. And I think the best thing you can do is create a business product and service, and a robust business that's going to make a lot of money. And the product and service that you deliver makes the world a better place. It makes people's lives better. It ends up being part of the thing that allows you to leave the planet better when you leave than when you got here. But if you are going to get on that field as a business person, then play that game and be outrageously successful at that game. And don't allow yourself to fall in this guilt complex around, we don't want to make rich people richer and all this other stuff. No, become a power player. And then you are the one calling the shots. That's why this thing is so important, to liberate ourselves from that duality of thinking. I will get off the soapbox.
No, I mean, that's a perfect way for us to end this conversation. Thank you both so much. I'm going to actually turn it back to Colin. This was a fantastic conversation today. Thank you, Kwame. Thank you, Mike. Colin.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I couldn't agree more, Roberta. What a way to end the conversation, Kwame. Thank you so much, Kwame, Mike, and Roberta, for contributing your time, expertise, and so your wisdom. This is a truly unique perspective that many don't know. So hopefully our audience out there appreciates all of it. Thank you all for joining us online. If you're on YouTube and you'd like to see any more of these videos, sign up for our newsletter. We'd love to hear your feedback. So please, there's a survey link in the chat. But again, Kwame, Mike, Roberta, so grateful for your time, talent, and energy today. And we look forward to seeing everyone online soon. Appreciate it. Have a good one. Happy Friday.
Bye, everyone.
Have a good one.